In 2018, I was hired for the night shift as caretaker at Pennhurst Asylum. On my first night, they handed me a list of 10 rules sealed in a red envelope. The supervisor's hands trembled as he passed it to me. "Rule 8, he whispered, his eyes hollow and distant. "Whatever you do, never break Rule 8. He walked away before I could ask why. I didn't understand the warning until I wrote Rule number 8. Rule number 1. The main entrance was always locked promptly at 10 p.m. We had to ensure the iron gate was secured with 2 different chains, even though the building itself had no power to open anything. It was understood that the security of the outside world relied on those chains, not the security of the asylum. One night, the lead chain had been found draped over the stone wall outside, bent as if it had been forced open by immense pressure. The second chain was still intact, but the metal had been visibly stretched. We learned that whatever was inside wasn't trying to get out. It was sending us a warning that the boundary was purely theoretical and that it could cross at any time. After that night, the double chaining became a ritual of survival, not security. Rule number 2. The echoes of the wards were deceiving. Every night, between 11 p.m. and midnight, heavy, hurried footsteps sounded down the central corridor of the B building. They never stopped at a door, never changed pace, and always disappeared exactly at the hour. We initially believed it was residual energy, a psychic playback. One new caretaker decided to try and record the sound to verify this. He placed his recorder in the hallway and retreated. When we reviewed the recording, the footsteps were clear, but interspersed between them was a soft, wet thump. The sound was of a heavy mass dragging its weight on the floor, trailing the footsteps. We had realized the steps weren't a ghost of a doctor, they were a lure. The dragging sound was the entity that had been following the footsteps, and it had been getting closer to the recorder every cycle. We learned never to give the sound a reason to slow down or investigate us. Rule number 3. In the administration building's basement, the patient files were stored in locked cabinets. It was strictly mandated that we never, under any circumstance, touch the brass handles. If we had to enter the room, we moved around the cabinets in a wide arc. The moment our hands touched a handle, the metal would instantly turn cold, and the file folders inside would begin to rustle, sliding against each other. It wasn't the air conditioning, the building had no climate control. It was the collective voices of every patient whose records were held in that specific cabinet, manifesting as a frantic, audible shuffling. They were all trying to get their file to the front to be read. We had discovered that if we had read a name, that person's need would be transferred to us, compelling us to fulfill their last, desperate asylum desire, and we would remain until it was done. Rule number 4. The hydrotherapy room on the first floor was always cold, but every night after 1 a.m., the massive porcelain tubs would be wet, glistening with a fresh, hot film of water. We knew the pipes were drained and dry. We knew there was no source. This was the entity known as the soaker. We were required to take a specific path through the room, keeping our backs to the wall, not to the tubs. If we had walked between the tubs, we could feel a sudden, suffocating pressure, like hands pressing against our chest and back. The air around the tub we passed would shimmer, and the hot water would suddenly splash over the rim, even though nothing had entered it. It was the soaker trying to force us into a bath. We learned that if the water had touched our skin, the burn felt exactly like boiling steam, and the heat would never leave our body. Rule number 5. The patient viewing window of the main surgery theater was cracked in a distinctive spiderweb pattern. Every night, as the moon passed overhead, a single black, empty eye would appear in the center of the largest crack. This was the sentinel. We were instructed to never look directly into that eye. Instead, we were told to approach the window, lift our flashlight, and shine it directly at our own feet. The moment the light hit the floor, a single, audible snort would emanate from the other side of the glass, like a deep, disappointed sigh. This sound was our clearance. It meant the sentinel had judged us unworthy of its attention, or perhaps too insignificant to collect. If we had looked up, even for a fraction of a second, the eye would have locked onto ours, and the window would have become transparent, revealing the sentinel's full, horrific form standing right behind us. Rule number 6. The attic spaces, filled with decaying medical equipment and old beds, contained a specific form of residual light. At 3 a.m., a small, weak flashlight beam would appear near the far chimney. It moved slowly and deliberately, searching the shadows. It wasn't an earthly beam of light. It was the light of a long-dead caretaker searching for his missing shift key. We were warned that if we had spoken to the light, or attempted to guide it with our own flashlight beam, the light would instantly turn on us, focusing with unnatural intensity. The light wasn't seeking an object, it was seeking a replacement. If we had helped it, the flashlight beam would have immediately burned out, and the lost caretaker would have found his way out of the asylum, using our body as the new source of his enduring, fruitless search. Rule number 7. In the laundry room, the heavy industrial washers would sometimes begin to tumble and spin on their own. The drum would rotate slowly, and the metallic scraping noise would fill the cavernous room. We knew that inside the washer was the uniform of the patient they called the unclean. We learned not to panic, but to stand perfectly still, facing the machine. If we had attempted to run, the washer would have instantly sped up, the spinning would have become a violent, roaring cyclone, and the machine would have physically dragged the linen chute door open to spew forth the unclean's tattered, heavy garments. Those garments, saturated with decades of biological terror, would have wrapped around our limbs and throat, suffocating us with their toxic filth. We found that if we had stood motionless and watched the cycle complete, the washer would eventually slow down, the spinning would stop, and the unclean would remain contained. Rule number 8. The most challenging, most terrifying protocol involved the old isolation cell, room 413 on the top floor. This room was padded with thick, yellowing horsehair lining. Every hour on the hour, from midnight until 4 a.m., the air pressure inside this room would drop, creating a perfect vacuum. This was the breathless hour of the supplicant. We were required to open the heavily bolted door, step 1 foot inside, and hold our breath for exactly 45 seconds. No more, no less. This was done to prove we could withstand the crushing absence of air. During those seconds, the silence would be total, yet we could hear a sound like sandpaper rubbing against bone coming from the walls. We knew the supplicant was inside the padding, desperately trying to share the vacuum. If we had panicked and taken even a single gasping breath while inside the cell, the vacuum would have instantly filled with the supplicant's own foul, ancient air. Our lungs would have collapsed, and the pressure would have driven us deep into the soiled, yellow padding, trapping us there until the next caretaker performed the ritual and released us by mistake. This act of confronting a life-ending vacuum was mandatory for the night's containment. Rule number 9. The tunnels beneath the asylum were only to be used as a last resort, for emergency access between buildings. If we had to enter the tunnels, the flashlight beam had to be aimed at the ground 2 feet in front of our boots, never toward the ceiling. We learned that the tunnel ceiling was the territory of the Hangmen. These were the suspended, skeletal remains of staff who had taken their own lives down there. They hung perfectly still, but they were active. If we had raised our light to look at them, they would have reacted by releasing a blinding, sulfuric dust from their deteriorating clothes. This dust was a hallucinogen. It would have made the entire tunnel appear to be collapsing on us, forcing us to abandon our path and run blindly into the deeper, uncharted parts of the asylum's foundations. We kept our light low, respected their space, and accepted the sound of dry bone tapping against the low concrete as we passed underneath. Rule number 10. The final act of the night, before leaving the grounds, was to place the single, fresh, red rose we carried with us onto the cold stone bench outside the superintendent's office. This was a payment. It was the only acceptable toll. We found that if we had forgotten the rose, or if we had attempted to leave the asylum without leaving the offering, a low, guttural moan would have sounded from the bell tower overhead, a sound that vibrated through the ground. The asylum walls would have closed in around us. Our car would have failed to start, the gate would have welded shut, and we would have been forced back inside to search for the rose we should have brought. The rose was the required exchange for our freedom, a temporary symbol of life given in tribute to the dead.